and welcome to another edition of IDS Talks. My name is Hunter McMahon, and I'm the COO at IDS, and I am joined here today by Jacques Nack. We're going to have a great conversation with about ChatGPT, because it's one of the many new generative AI applications out there. Jacques, what is the latest question you've asked of ChatGPT?
Well, hello. Question I've asked of ChatGPT, 1,500 ways to make $1 billion.
Did it give you any good answers? Because I'm gonna be working on that over here to the side.
Can you give me example of a stock trading strategy that works and things like that? And we try to use this, but the bottom line is all come back to this very point, which is do we know how to properly prompt the system, and do we know how to make the best use of it right now? And so we're very tempted to use the platform like we use Google to ask questions and to get and to get the response. And because of the narrative, sort of the human narrative that ChatGPT produced, we have we believe that what we see and what we read is right. It's true. It always, sounds very well argued and very well organized. And so, we kind of tend to go to it for very important decisions. So to draft very important documents, etc. And I think that's where lays the trouble, right? What is the appropriate use for ChatGPT, and when can we use it? When can we not use it? And how do we consider, and how do we essentially evaluate the answers that we get from the platform?
But I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense of there's some proper use cases, right? There are some very easy use cases. I used it yesterday as an example of an email that I really wanted to send that was very direct and shall we call it abrasive. And I said, tone this down and make it nice. And it did a great job. It took exactly the points that I needed to make or wanted to make, I should say. And then it made it a much better narrative. It's taken and changed tones of LinkedIn posts, or refine it, or summarized content down to a shorter amount of words. But I've also seen it fail when I said, summarize this recent Illinois Supreme Court decision, and it was woefully wrong, completely wrong set of facts, but it looked really good. And if I had not read the actual opinion, I might have, taken that summary and run with it, just like the lawyer did recently that we've seen citing cases that did not exist.
That was a very fun case indeed. I read about it, but we've also seen the same thing with student writing articles and submitting essays that are listing and referring to books that have never been written or that never existed. And it is really on how you prompt the platform. If you see, give me an example of, or create a fictitious statement of, well, the system will do just that, right? And a good example of how we've used it recently, some of our engineers needed to create, sample data sets and, to test a new platform that we're designing. And so we had an example of one of those data set, and it was easy to go to ChatGPT and say, you know what? Create 100 more that looks exactly like that. And in that example, because the result is fictitious, because the expectation that's coming out is fictitious, there was a tremendous amount of time saved in terms of creating the formatting, the output in the right format with the variations in names and in addresses and things like that we wanted to do to enable to power something. But when you start to talk about emotion, a legal document, something that it has to link to specific factual events or factual research. The system is going to be subject to a bias. It's going to be subject to mitigation. Remember that the way the model is trained is sometimes by providing it data that is generated in fake to help it achieve specific conclusion, mathematical approximations. But the outcome here is a mathematical test, not necessarily a logical or truth test. And so the result of the generative AI text can be subject to those changes as well. There's also other questions around transparency. There are questions around the explainability of the outputs, in system. There are issues around, how you convey information in the system. And so when using it, like you mentioned, it's user error, right? It's we have to understand what we put.
But it's not really garbage in, garbage out, like many other data problems we have. It is a bad question in, garbage out. Like do you understand what you're asking it? Does it understand you? Because it seems very conversational. So it's lowered the barrier of access, if you will, to the average user. But there's still a lot that goes on.
I'd like to think that models or searching models, like the ones we've seen for years, Google, Bing, that are either based on the popularity of specific topic, how often people are accessing that topic, and ranking them and classifying those topics as the answer for a given reason. Like when you go to Google, you don't get the answer. You get the answer most people are accessing as the first result, right? There's already a bias there, but again, you are basically dealing in the context of a Google type search systems or Bing type search system with essentially a crowd-based a vetting of the answer, right? So if a lot of very smart people continues to upvote and access the very same site and very same resource, then the bias that is ingested by the platform is that, well, these answers here tend to be right and tend to be sought after by people. Well, the experience you have with ChatGPT is a very unique one-on-one experience. Are you asking your own question and you're getting your own feedback? Right. And the system tends to generate the answer with respect to that contextual conversation. And while doing that, it's also learning, but it's learning from all of us. It's learning from people prompting bad questions and people prompting good questions.
Well, so let's talk about it learning from all of us. Mm-hmm. I can assume that everything I put in there is strictly confidential, will never be reused or repurposed, right? I mean, it's a safe place to put my personal private data in there.
No. We've seen quite a bit of that, right? Remember, when we talk about data, the notion of anonymity.
There we go.
Right. That issue is really limited by the ability of the consumer of that anonymous data to reconstruct the data point. The fact is, if we were sharing only all of our information through the same channel, then we would have some assurance that what we have protected, it is indeed protected. But we know today that people can reconstruct data by pulling the missing information using alternate sources. We've seen companies and, we've seen CFOs use ChatGPT to upload very sensitive financial information into the system. We've seen other people put very sensitive documents, very critical contract in the system for a second review. For instance, in the example you mentioned earlier, please tone down this particular response. What if it was a very important email or a letter that was supposed to go to just a need-to-know person? Now it's available, it's been available in the Microsoft dataset, in the chat and OpenAI dataset. It's now available there. And that type of leakage may have consequences. I think right now we don't really know, but it is, from a data security and data privacy standpoint, it is important to think about what you use as your prompt and what you use as your examples, how you mention people, to think about controls around anonymity, right? Implementing controls around security. And ultimately, you have to have, if you're looking at the subject matter expertise type of topic, it is important to understand actually and to be able to interpret the answers. I definitely wouldn't really be able to understand ChatGPT responding to me about a question on medical something, and I'll just take its words for it, right?
So let's use that example though, and I think I have found a couple of these where it's a starting point of knowledge. It's not the destination, if you will. So if you sat there and said, "I'm feeling this way, what kind of doctor should I call?" Maybe there is a symptom analysis that you could get at least a direction, but you're not there to get a diagnosis. You're there to maybe know a next step.
Are you doing WebMD right now?
No, I'm combining the two. But okay, so another example is, where should I look for statutes about something? I'm not saying that is my final research destination. I'm not using that as the end all be all. But if I don't even know where to start, it could give me a baseline reference point to get going. I think some of the common ones is, tell me more about this or explain this to me. And it simplifies it in a way that it lets you get started, not finish your research trail, if you will.
Absolutely. I think there is tremendous applications for ChatGPT. But however, it is not ready to replace, a professional that has spent years building his craft and learning about a particular area of knowledge. ChatGPT won't replace your lawyer. You won't replace your doctor for a professional opinion that looks at fact and looks at the details. It's a language model. And I think it's very important to not just skip very quickly through those warnings and those notices that ChatGPT presents before you start every one of the sessions, right? It is very important. And also understand the nuance between, version 3 versus version 4 and version 2 in how it's interpreting and providing those answers. How do you go about prompting the system? I don't know, right? I think that one of the areas here is that you have to make sure that if you're using the model, it's a regularly maintained model. It's a model that has the most updated version. You have to be able to sometimes the answers require to have subject matter expertise to detect bias or to detect trends of thoughts within the system. I would be very curious to see what would be ChatGPT analysis of, for instance, Elon Musk's tweet over time, and ranking them in terms of sentiment or in terms of affiliation with one party or another, right? And you might see, looking at that, how the bias in the system for a topic that is widely discussed and where everybody has his own personal opinion is received by various people who are using the platform. In terms searching and classifying information as ChatGPT presents it is very different than retrieving information in the way that Google was making it available. With ChatGPT, we're not necessarily retrieving information, right? What we are is asking the system to come back with some, a logicalized version of human thoughts.
And I think one of the things that it's done more than anything, you talked about how it comes back and the interaction, is it's really made it more accessible. The technology is made now accessible to, I'll call it a broader population, not everybody, but a very large population, where those type of algorithms and technology was hidden in a black box that only data scientists could access for a long time. And then it became it had some other UIs and some other applications. We've obviously used a lot of technology in the legal space, but how do we make sure that it doesn't become, you talked about the leakage earlier, and become a huge liability for companies? How do we make sure that users understand the boundaries to put around it?
And I wouldn't say that I have the answer here. I'd say that, just like any new technology out there, in regulatory compliance, in, data security and privacy compliance, we have broad guidance around, securing our content, securing, ensuring that we use proper authorization for processing information, et cetera, et cetera. So we kind of have to look into that. Most people are deploying ChatGPT within the ChatGPT interface, but a lot of companies are now looking to implement generative AI as a search tool, as a tool within the application, a tool within business application, a number of other things. When they do so, we want them to make sure that they're using encrypted channel. We want them to make sure that they are using proper storage for that information, that they're using proper anonymization when needed, that they become aware of the applicable regulatory restriction. If you're dealing, for instance, with medical data, personal identifying information, financial record, and so forth, that you have those controls in place. With respect to how one consumes the information coming from the system, private implementation of generative AI the company implementing generative AI is going to be subject to those companies' own curation of the model and training of the language model to determine how the level of freedom they want to provide the system in expressing its in choosing words and generating the content. So all of those require proper considerations. We are still going through and learning about it, and there is not one company default. I mean, we now have AI systems with OpenAI, which is embedded with Microsoft and Bing, but we also have some systems with Google, right, to the system, and there are at least 3 or 4 other similar applications that I've looked into recently. One of our colleagues in the legal industry was recently discussing a new platform, generative AI, called Kevin. And this particular system was built and trained specifically for legal analysis and summaries and things of that nature. So quite a bit going out there, and regardless of what the topic is and what the specialty is, the requirements for the system still has to follow the law and still has to follow best practices.
So it's a great opportunity, but also great risk. And so it's a matter of understanding really what you're doing with the system, understanding where your data is going and how it is being used, so that you don't create unnecessary risk associated with the adoption of new technology.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that some of the things that we want to have, just like there's a requirement right now to disclose when you use robots to provide customer service in specific industries. Some of the controls that we may start to see come out might be for lawyers submitting motion or brief, a waiver stating that they have not used or it wasn't generated by a generative AI platform.
We've actually seen some of that with engagement letters where clients are specifically prohibiting the use of generative AI on their engagements.
Yes, exactly. So there is that, right? And if you use one of those things, you have to acknowledge that it wasn't really your content and that could have been flawed. So at least from professional responsibility, we don't have enough here and yet in terms of thresholds to argue for a lot of for a lot of these things. I mean, right now, a lot of these, even the lawyer's mistake, can be chalked up to an honest mistake. Let's see what the disciplinary actions with respect to his sanction motions, how those pan out in the next few weeks, months. We'll see how that comes out. But those become signs of what we're looking for on there.
Maybe we'll have to have a follow-up once those rulings come out. But for now, I want to thank you, Jacques, for joining us and our listeners again. If you'd like to learn more about iDS or subscribe, you can visit idsinc.com or wherever you normally get your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to the next edition of iDS Talks.
This was great. Thank you, Hunter.